decisions, and lo and behold, it happened.
The Mafia had a power that was unacknowledged and unchallenged, until the temptation to make even more money proved impossible to resist, and finally forced the US government to act. In the United States and Italy in the 1950s, the Mafia controlled many aspects of life. Yet the governments in both countries barely acknowledged the existence of organized crime. Law enforcement had a different enemy. The Cold War was at its height. The main target of the FBI were American communists, not Italian-American gangsters.
The communist bloc has woven a vast network of espionage throughout the free world.
Communist line is uniform and deadly. Destroy America.
After World War II, in the FBI's New York office, there were 400 agents chasing communists. There were just 5 dealing with organized crime. The story was similar at the Department of Justice, where William Hundley worked.
When I took over the organized crime section in the Justice Department in 87, there were basically, maybe 7 or 8 lawyers there who were basically clipping newspapers. They weren't doing anything either.
The director of the FBI was J. Edgar Hoover. He had been its head for over 30 years. Hoover was one of the most powerful men in Washington, eventually serving under 8 presidents. In law enforcement, what Hoover said went. And to Hoover, America's priority was the Red Menace. Hoover had almost no Italian-American agents who could infiltrate the mob. Indeed, he had few agents from any ethnic minority.
At that time, Hoover did not have one black agent. He had no female agents. Excuse me. His chauffeur was black, so he made his chauffeur an agent, so he could say he had one black agent. In essence, he had all of these waspy guys, with the snap hats on and whatnot. Yeah.
But from the late 1950s, a succession of events would change all that, finally forcing the authorities and the nation to acknowledge the existence of the Mafia. Once again, it all started in Sicily. And it was a story in which Mafia godfather Joe Bonanno played a central role. In late 1957, Bonanno took a trip back to his native Sicily. He had been born here in the tiny coastal town of Castellammare del Golfo before emigrating to the US as a youngster. But Bonanno's trip was no sentimental journey. The Mafia Don was on business. Joe Bonanno had maintained close links with his family and criminal associates in the old country. He was approached by some old acquaintances for advice on a pressing problem.
My dad told me that one of the leaders of the Palermo Mafia came to him and said that there's a few people that they would like talk to him about certain problems that they're having here in Sicily.
A meeting took place in this building, the Grand Hotel de Palme in Palermo, one of the top hotels in the Sicilian capital. Even to this day, details of who attended and what was discussed remain shrouded in mystery. Bonanno may not have been the only American present. Charles Lucky Luciano was now living in Italy, having been deported from the US after the war. Today, the Italian authorities believe that he was also present at the Hotel de Palme.
E dal 12 al 16 ottobre del 57 a Palermo.
From the 10th to the 16th of October 1957 in Palermo, in the Hotel de Palme, there was a summit of about 30 mafia bosses. American Cosa Nostra and Sicilian Mafia
le maggiori
bosses.
famiglie americane, cioè era presente per esempio la famiglia Bonanno con il suo capo Joe Bonanno, con altri membri.
The major American families were represented: Joe Bonanno, Lucky Luciano, who had been in Italy since 1947, and then there were the local mafia heads.
Era presente Lucky Luciano, che era già in Italia dal 1947, e poi erano presenti i capimafia locali, i capimafia siciliani.
Over dinner, the Sicilians explained why they wanted the meeting. This was a business convention, and high on the agenda was the subject of drugs, which offered vast profit, but at a price.
The purpose of the meeting was to pick my father's brains as to how they were going to resolve a problem they were beginning to have among each other over the narcotics trade in Turkey.
The Sicilians faced a dilemma.
Various families within the mafia were at odds as to whether they should or they shouldn't get themselves involved with this, and the younger element saw nothing wrong in making a profit.
In fact, the American Mafia was having the same debate about drugs. It seems that Joe Bonanno wasn't just offering friendly advice. He was there to close a deal that would reorganize the global trade in heroin. According to the FBI, it was this meeting which established the Bonanno family as the main players in the transatlantic heroin trade. The Sicilians would manufacture and smuggle the drug into the US. The Americans would distribute it and take a cut. This was the first time the mafias on both sides of the Atlantic had come together on such a scale. An early example of globalization, but run by organized crime.
Di Sicilian Connection si parla in epoca più tardi. Possiamo dire che sono state poste
The foundations were
le basi
laid for
per
collaboration between Sicilian
una
Mafia, which
collaborazione
wasn't yet
tra
called Cosa Nostra,
mafia siciliana,
and the American
ancora
Cosa
si
Nostra, which
sapeva
had
chiamarsi
as
Cosa
its
Nostra.
main
Era
objective
Cosa Nostra
heroin trafficking.
americana, che ha al suo centro il traffico di eroina, questo senz'altro.
Bill Bonanno says the organization of the Mafia itself was also on the agenda, and that his father advised the Sicilians to copy Luciano's recipe for resolving disputes.
It was at that meeting that he suggested that one of the ways that they might resolve their problem and have a little better handle on the situation is to do what the Americans had done, and that was to form a commission.
The Sicilians did set up a commission, but it would only meet a few times and never gained the authority of the American original. In America, the subject of drugs continued to dominate mafia discussions.
The new organization that Luciano created solved just about every problem you could think of, except one: narcotics. In the beginning, Luciano assumed that the organization could keep organized crime out of narcotics altogether. It simply wasn't worth the trouble. The difficulty was the money.
And for the Mafia, money was always irresistible. The Americans arranged a summit to ratify the deal with their Sicilian cousins, a meeting that would provide one of the most infamous moments of their history. The deal between the Sicilian and American Mafia in late 1957 was a turning point for both organizations. The money offered by the drug business was the key. Everyone knew that drug dealing was a far bigger dollar earner than other activities like illegal gambling and extortion. But it also brought with it long prison sentences. And mob bosses feared that their men would break the code of silence if they faced decades in prison.
There was friction among the various families. Some of the younger people, especially those in New York and in Boston and in Chicago, thought that this was the great new thing coming. Speaking strictly about money.
The Mafia in Chicago, known as the Outfit, claimed the hardest anti-drugs line. Frank Carlotta was a rising young gangster there.
At the time I was there was no drugs allowed to be